Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks. Today, I continue my conversation with Professor Lewis Gordon, the author of What Fanon Said. Now, in the previous discussion, of course, we introduced Fanon to the audience and we gave you much of his thought and his mindset. And I would just like to read from this book, the epigraph, and welcome. I would like to say welcome again, and
welcome.
Thank you for being here, Professor. Thank you. So here in your epigraph, you've got a quote by Frantz Fanon, and it says, "Raise the world with language empowered by the act." And then you've quoted Steve Biko, who says there's no freedom in silence.
Correct.
Now, I particularly like this because very often you find that people choose the notion of neutrality, and that's their way of holding on to, a silence to favor a particular point without having to commit themselves. And there can be no freedom. I think it was either Biko or Fanon, I'm not sure, who made the distinction between liberation. I think it was Fanon who made the distinction between liberation and freedom. So it's very, very important for people to understand that when you are faced with an injustice, that you have to choose a side. Now, I want to bring that particular idea to the Rhodes Must Fall debate. Because when we had the big discussion in South Africa about Rhodes Must Fall, people were saying that, no, let's forget about the past, let's stay neutral, let's look at the good things that Rhodes did, and of course the money that's coming in from the foundation that's providing bursaries to the very many black candidates who are benefiting from it. And then there were others who were saying that, you know what, for us to get involved in this, it's possible that they will take away our positions, or they will take away our jobs, or they will take away our bursaries, those who are benefiting it. So you have these two sides of the debate. Now, how do you see that? And one last very thing I want to throw at you is that the feedback that I got, the absolute criticism that I got from when I wrote my response, was people telling me, oh, if that's the case, then take away the universities, take away the roads, the cars, all these that you are benefiting from, because colonialism has brought you all of these advancements. The black man and the black government has done nothing.
God, what hypocritical and cherry-picked history.
Yeah, okay.
First of all, the fact of the matter is, look at the basic hypocrisy. While telling you should not look at the past, they're constantly bombarding the subjugated populations of this country with a glorified white past. So they sure want to hold on to the past, in which they're the agents of history and the ones who are doing all the triumph in the universities and all that. And also, they don't want us to look at the past, in which, if we look at it enough, we realize that's a distorted history. So the first response I would give is, who do you think built these roads? Who do you think, and not just the question of the level of the labor. One of the things I talk about in my lectures is this very distorted view of not only black history, African history, just world history. There's a man in Mexico, formerly from Argentina, called Enrique Dussel, writing an alternative world history. And in that, here are some things people don't understand. First thing, and I mentioned in my earlier lecture, the people who were kidnapped, people who were stolen from this continent, weren't just labor, they were skilled labor. They were minds, they had creativity. There were women and men who knew how to transform their environment and their world. And they brought that intelligence, that talent to the Americas and all over to the colonies, and produced the wealth that constituted what we call the so-called modern world. So first of all, the answer is, who do you think really built this? And not just at the level of physical labor, but at the level of ideas. If you were to take away, I was at a conference once where there was unfortunately, a black African man who subscribed to this, about how we don't build anything, we're too dependent. I said, you don't know your history. If we were to eliminate the things that were built by people of color, we wouldn't even have the space. First of all, for instance, there wouldn't be a light bulb. The filament was why people were black. You're talking about a road example. You couldn't stop your car in the street. Brakes, stoplights, doorknobs. I could go at the levels of technologies. But not only at the levels of technology, the level of understanding knowledge and sciences. The very foundations, for instance, that separated our species from the others through the use of the symbol happened on this continent. And it's not only if we're dealing with antiquity. But let's deal with antiquity for a second. If one is even to understand everything from medicine, the first cities, the very question of how to organize humanity in various ways, the question of numbers. The fact of the matter is, even with the period that's valorized in classical antiquity, we're talking about people on the continent we call Europe who didn't even understand the concept of zero. You wouldn't have this university and the higher order of mathematics without that, and that did not come from the white world. So the fact of the matter is, just even on the level of science, just even on that, the fact is scientific achievements were achieved by humanity.
Yes.
But if we want to get into this white-black thing, if we really want to get into it,
there was the black people.
It created a pumped-up image of what it is to be white, when most white people didn't even contribute stitch to that. The fact of the matter is, humanity has inherited something that many of us have contributed to, but Anna Julia Cooper, the woman I mentioned in the previous lecture, she raised a very interesting argument. She said, you know, at the end of the day, what you're worth is the proportion that you give in relation to what's invested in you. Now, very little has been invested in black people the past 500 years, but an awful lot has come out. So what Rhodes Must Fall could say is, yeah, if you were to go, the fact of the matter is we have a lot of talent to build things. And the proportion invested isn't there. But you see, it's not only about South Africa. And Fanon would say it's part of a global situation of trying to degrade and stratify people. So there's a connection between what's happening in South Africa, in Greece, in Lithuania, in Australia with the Aboriginal populations, the relationship of India to Pakistan and Indonesia, the whole question of how China is going to relate to the United States. We're interconnected because remember, Fanon's message was that we're all interconnected. We're part of a human world in which there are those among us who are trying to hoard power instead of having it distributed. And humanity has always done better when power spreads, because you see, power facilitates and enables the capacity to be creative around the symbolic world. And in the human world, that means power is also productive. And so if we disempower people, the fact is we begin to contract humanity, and we're seeing these problems happen today not only at the level of personal degradation, but let's face it, this contraction and obsession with self-interest is also destroying our planet. So we need as human beings to take responsibility all the way through to our environment, and that begins with our relationship to each other. And that's what Fanon would argue.
Okay, so I see here we have 3 different covers of Fanon.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one has a bit more of a cream background.
And more to come.
And
what
more
it
to
is
come, okay. And can you perhaps lift that one up
so
that...
It would be a crime for a book that's arguing what Fanon said to not be accessible to the people. Okay. Fanon, the people is everybody.
Yes.
So I had worked out that the book is published all over the world by local publishers. Okay. So this is the South African edition by Wits University Press.
Right.
This is in North America by Fordham University Press.
Right.
This is in the UK and Europe by Hearst.
Okay.
And editions are coming out in Brazil, in Colombia, there's already a Swedish one coming out.
It's all in English, or you're translating?
No. Now we're moving to the other languages.
Okay, great.
Because in Southern Africa, you can get it through Wits.
Yes.
North America through, and in Europe, those are the English speakers. Now we're working on Swedish, Portuguese, Arabic.
Okay.
There are people who talk about Mandarin or Chinese. And as long as people want to have a different view of what Fanon said, instead of the versions that try to de-intellectualize the ideas and also depoliticize them. Because you see, for Fanon, politics and intellect are not actually separate. Because politics for Fanon is about the expansion of freedom. And freedom includes also the ability to think. So for Fanon, when you suppress freedom, you're suppressing ideas as well. Our humanity, for Fanon, politics are connected to what it is to be a human being. It's part of our nutrition. And so this should be available to all, and that's why there are different local editions. So for those of you in Southern Africa, you can get this one very inexpensively. Those in North America, if this reaches there, and those in Europe, if it reaches them. And others will be coming. The translations are in the works.
So if you look at basically from this particular edition that you've done, I see a lot of the work has been focusing on the damned of the earth also. You include a lot of discussion on that, and you do bring in a bit of black skins, white...
Actually, I do. I do a lot in all of the works.
Yes.
But but the thing is, I do them in my own translations, and but I integrate his life with the work because I didn't want to separate them. So, for instance, there are 2 chapters to Black Skin, White Mask, and I set it up in 2 chapters. And I integrated his life in it because I was also not trying to romanticize Fanon. So you'll see there's some of his shortcomings that are brought out. And among them is, for instance, the structure of his first book is very similar to the way Simone de Beauvoir talked about the second sex. And the volume 2 is lived experience. The second part of the book is l'expérience vécue de noir, lived experience of the black. I also talk about, and I also needed to explain things for readers who are not familiar with all these academic debates, so I had to put them into ordinary language to know why.
That's what I really enjoyed about the...
Right. A lot of people are wondering, why is this an issue? So I had to show why it's an issue. But with Le Dernier de la Terre, I also talked a lot about, there's this chapter called Revolutionary Therapy, where I talked about what he did as a psychiatrist and how he was revolutionizing how psychiatric practice is done. For instance, a lot of people, when they talk about the birth of the clinic and the asylum, they think of Michel Foucault, the French theorist. But the French theorist lived in Tunisia while he was thinking about a lot of these ideas. And Fanon founded the first day psychiatric clinic in Tunisia. And a lot of those are Fanon's ideas with no reference to Fanon by Foucault.
So, Professor, I want you to hold on to that particular thought. We're going to the break. And when we come back, we'll raise this issue a little further. We'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of my interview today with Professor Lewis Gordon. And we're speaking about Fanon and what Fanon said, and of course the relevance of Fanon in the context that we find ourselves today. Okay, so you said that the book is now, you're making it accessible to different parts of the country, South Africa, and of course to the continent, to the various countries as well. You mentioned something that you're going to translate it in Arabic as well. I'm curious now, what is the response of the Arab reader to Fanon, and how is Fanon accepted in the Middle Eastern world?
Oh, well...
I'm curious about that.
I actually talk about this quite a bit in the book because, you see, there were people who tried to say Fanon was no longer relevant, he belonged to the past. The moment the United States started bombing Afghanistan and Iraq, people realized, the person who analyzed these situations, well, all those debates were in Fanon's writing. Wow. The debates about, for instance, the hijab, all those issues are in Fanon. The question of how colonialism tries to go after the women, in Fanon. The question of how the construction of the elision, the wiping away of the different communities around North Africa, East Africa. I always say West Asia because the Middle East is a colonial construction.
Right, okay.
But so for me, all West Asia is the continuation of East Africa.
Right.
But all those things Fanon talked about. Fanon rejected the separation of North and South, the Northern Africa and Southern Africa. For him, it was just Africa. All those things, when they talk about the Arab Spring, no, Fanon would say it was an African Spring.
Okay.
All these things, so Fanon became very, very relevant. And within those frameworks, what began to be very clear is that in the Arab world, everywhere I go, and I've spoken with people because, it's ridiculous if you're going to talk about Fanon and not address this issue. The fact, not only the Algerian Revolution, but he also affected other debates, also in the conflicts between Sunni and Shia. Because Fanon. Okay. Because Ali Shariati, who's Shia, translated Le Dernier de la Terre. Okay. And he was also in debates around issues with Fanon, the French, particularly around the question of how you deal with religion. Because you see, Fanon was arguing that you shouldn't compartmentalize and separate off the human being. Yes. Well, the human being has a spiritual side. And Ali Shariati was arguing that. But there are others, not only Shariati, there are also people, Badawi and others in North Africa, who are dealing with these issues of how you deal with these existentialisms. But the attack of collapsing everybody into this one category called violent and terrorist actually pushed things more to the right and began to eliminate those critical voices, made them voiceless, invisible. And there is a wonderful book, for instance, by a woman, Elizabeth Kassab, who looks at the history of Arab political thought. And it's a really thick book and deserved. It's not a phallic book. It's thick because it's a lot of, people think the entire Arab world of thought is collapsed into one issue, Islam. But there are more issues at work. It includes Islam, but it also includes, for instance, on Palestinian issues, there are Christian Palestinians, there were Palestinian Jews.
Of course.
My mother's family were Palestinian Jews.
Wow.
They were Palestinian Sephardic. And there are other kinds too. So that's one of the reasons when I go through the world, I mean, the dreadful, but when people, I don't know what people see. Some people see an Arab, some people see I'm also a Tamil. Some people see just simply an African. Some people see a Jew. Some people see other kinds. But the answer is I'm all of them. And Fanon empowers that. So the impact he has on many, when I spoke in UNESCO, it struck me, and just to give you a context, I had an argument with an anthropologist in Paris. I brought up Fanon. She said, but nobody in France reads Fanon.
Okay.
Now, she was saying it to me.
Right.
Now, a year earlier, I spoke in UNESCO in front of 900 people in Paris around Fanon. Those 900 people were African immigrants. They were from North Africa, Southern Africa, Central Africa. There were people who were, a lot of women there of all backgrounds, from Muslim to Jewish, all these. Think about this. This is what brought all these populations together. But you see, for this woman who attacked that statement, for her, somebody is a small elite set of white French men who sit in the Sorbonne and say they read. They don't really read anybody but each other. But the point is, Fanon wasn't writing for them. He was writing for those people who showed up in UNESCO. He was writing for people in the townships of South Africa, and he talks about that in his books. He was writing for those women who are having their pelvis broken from being raped in the Congo. He was right. I could go down the list. All over the world, these people pick up Fanon, and he understands that Fanon isn't perfect, but he's taken the time to try to help understand their condition. And I think that's good enough for him. But for us, we need to take it further.
Oh, certainly. That means we have a lot of work to do. And let's be positive, and let's also be constructive. In terms of your advice to South Africans and to the youth, firstly, people in, for example, the Rhodes Must Fall campaign, people who are fighting for transformation of the curricula, what would you say? Where do they start?
They start by understanding really what political struggle is about. And this is the message from Fanon. You start by understanding the struggle is not about you. It's about those two who are to inherit what you have done. And so Fanon died in 1961, December 6, 1961. But we're here because of what he had done, and that includes what he had said.
And so your parting message about Fanon, what do you think is crucial, and what about Fanon basically made Fanon a project for you?
Well, for me, it's three levels. First, I was introduced to him as a child because I had Rastafarian uncles who had his books. And even though they weren't reading them, I read them. And this is a message. Even if you don't read the book, parents, get the books in your home.
Right.
The second thing is, when I did begin to read them and I went on in life, he made sense to me. But the third is, I was lucky because when I was doing my doctorate, I studied with some of the greatest intellectuals at the time. My advisor was Alfred Schutz, who was one of the giants of social thought from Europe, who was connected to Edmund Husserl. My other advisor, he studied with Bertrand Russell and Gadamer. So this is the white world. But my other advisor was a black woman who studied with Lonergan, and she was part of womanist theology and part of black feminist thought in the United States, and she taught Fanon. All three, without hesitation. When I was lucky because, you see, the people before me fought. There were people who were even fired from their jobs for even saying the words Fanon. They couldn't even, it was like fired. But then these people in this august institution were mavericks. And this unusual committee of women, of a black woman and these two old men, without hesitation, said that one of the greatest intellectuals of the 20th century was Frantz Fanon, and the real issue would be if he were absent from your work would be the problem.
Wow.
The debate wasn't about including him. The debate was about why do others have him absent. And that's an unusual ability for a young person to start his career. But the last part is to see over the years what happens when people learn to take responsibility for their actions. Fanon would basically say that you have to understand that the world we're trying to build is a world in which people have the right to live. And one of the things I've learned from Fanon in writing about his biography is although he was fighting struggles, dealing with death threats and actually assassination attempts, although he was doing all that, Fanon, in the midst of all those struggles, all that misery, always found time to live. He danced, he ate good music, he made love, he lived. And any revolution, any political struggle that gives no room for you to live as a human being and sit down and say, I'm happy to be alive, is not worth its salt.
Of course, because it's about denying your basic essence of a human being, and that is to live, isn't it? And that falls in with that whole idea of you dehumanizing you so that you become this commodity, etc.
Correct. Revolution for Fanon is an act of love.
Okay, so we're at the end. Your last favorite quote from Fanon.
My favorite quote from Fanon? My favorite quote from Fanon is actually, there are actually two.
Okay, you can give them both.
And they're both ending quotes from the end of Black Skin, White Mask, when he said, oh, my body, make of me a man who questions. A human being for Fanon is not a thing, a description. A human being is a question. When we meet each other as possibility, that's a human world. People always say, what does he mean by the human?
Yes.
The human being is always a question because in a human being is possibility. The second one is at the end of Le Dernier de la Terre, and when he says we need to build new concepts and set afoot a new humanity, well, that is the task of intellectual work, isn't it? New concepts, but new concepts that understands its relationship to the past as a condition for the possibility of the future. It is, as one says in this continent, sankofic, the bird that looks back as it moves ahead. But Fanon understands very well that to build that is in our hands.
Yeah, but we've got a few minutes left, and I just want to raise that question. So if he says both concepts instead of a new humanity, but then we've got to come to that agreement that everybody is part of this humanity, isn't
Correct.
it? But you're not getting that vision at the moment because there's still this whole concept of othering.
Well, it's not even othering, because you see, what I put on the book is at least othering is another human being.
Okay.
The problem is an effort to create a world in which there are no others or selves. The only people who count are those who dominate. But the thing is, the people who are invested in, the issue is not about those people. The real issue is about those of us who say that is wrong. If you really believe that is wrong, Fanon says, then you got to do something. Fanon is writing to the person who says, I will not tolerate this. The person who says, if you're going to be committed to revolution, then Fanon is saying that you must do revolutionary deeds. But revolutionary deeds, ultimately, are acts of love, not hate. Because hate is a form of slavery. If you work from hate, then you're always reacting.
Yes.
You're reacting to those whom you hate. If you act from love, it means you can ignore them and build the world. And they may decide, well, I want a piece of that. Yes. You have to make hate irrelevant.
Yeah, because you don't want it to consume you, isn't it?
Correct.
There was a very good quote. It said that in creating this alternate world that Fanon speaks about is that become better, don't become like the beast that oppressed you.
Correct. The onus of always, it's just a fact, whether we like it or not. I've seen activists say, why do we always have to? And the answer is because you are the ones who say there's something wrong. If you don't want to do it, if you don't want to be involved in struggles, it's very easy. Become complicit with the system.
And we don't want
And your
that.
life will be easier.
Yeah, and so, okay, we've come to the end, and again, I'm coming back to your T-shirt where you say you're unapologetically black, and I want to say I am unapologetically a Muslim, because I think that is also a very controversial discussion.
Well, you shouldn't have to apologize for that.
I know.
And I should add, whenever I say black, black for me is a lot like the way Biko said black. For me, black is a relationship. It's not a racial formation and so forth. Black is the willingness to say that the white story is only part of the story. There's more. But that more that's rendered opaque, that's the blackness. So for me, blackness is that about trying to have a relationship to something that many people attempt to avoid, and that is reality.
That is reality. So we're going to leave it on that. But I want to say thank you very much for making this time.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for writing this book and for making it accessible, because part of the whole idea of changing the narrative is to give people access to knowledge. And this is a tremendous contribution. So thank you once again for being here, and again for sharing your knowledge and your education and your time with us. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.